Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I'd like to talk today about protein quality. There's a lot of misinformation and misdirection in the mainstream nutritional literature about the quality of particular proteins, and I think a lot of this originates from companies wanting to sell protein powders, and also from those with a vested interest in farming livestock. Protein quality is an interesting subject. It's misunderstood by a lot of people. If we simplify the process so that we can understand why protein quality is important, we can then look at the different sources of protein in the diet and see what the quality of those proteins are and whether they are useful in terms of human nutrition. Protein is made up of amino acids. 8 of those amino acids are essential amino acids, which means that humans cannot synthesize them. We require them in the diet because we don't have a metabolic pathway in order to be able to create them endogenously in our cells. So those eight amino acids are very important. If we're missing any of those amino acids, we have problems with our health, and we eventually obviously will die. They are essential to our health. Now, when we digest protein in our gastrointestinal tracts, we absorb the amino acids, some of them which are the 8 essential amino acids, along with the non-essential amino acids. They pass into our blood, and then from the blood they pass into the cells. Now, cells can use amino acids for protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is a DNA-directed system within the cells that creates various proteins that are required for example, the creation of skeletal muscle, the creation of the regeneration of cells. Protein synthesis is vital to all cells because cells are created and made partly of protein. Now, the essential amino acids are required to create proteins within cells, and if any of them are missing from the diet or they are in the wrong ratios, protein synthesis in cells is not able to be completed correctly, and therefore that leads to cellular problems, cellular disease, ill health, and eventually death. Now, the essential amino acids in our diet are required. They are the limiting factor in terms of protein synthesis. If any of the essential amino acids are missing from our diet, the other amino acids cannot be utilized for protein synthesis. So this is where the concept of limiting amino acids comes from. For a protein to be complete, it has to contain all of the essential amino acids in the correct ratio and the correct amounts needed for human metabolism. If any of those essential amino acids, any of those 8 essential amino acids are missing, then the protein synthesis within cells will not be able to proceed. Now, if we look at animal proteins are classed as complete proteins. They contain all of the essential amino acids, and therefore you can survive eating just animal proteins because they are not limited in their protein quality. Dairy products also, animal products, they are also complete proteins. If we go to plant proteins, plants tend to have amino acids, one of the essential amino acids missing in terms of the fact that it's not in high enough concentrations in the food in order to be able to allow protein synthesis to occur. So if we have a look at grains are low in lysine. Now, that means that if you only eat grains, you will eventually not be able to utilize the protein in those grains above a particular level because the lysine is not present in high enough amounts, and this limits the quality of the protein. It limits the bioavailability of the protein within the grain for use in protein synthesis. We look at legumes. They are deficient in methionine. That means that there is a limiting factor within the protein of the grain, of the legume, because of the low methionine content. If we look at corn, for example, the limiting amino acid in corn is tryptophan. And this is why plant proteins are called incomplete proteins. They tend to be missing one, sometimes more than one of the essential amino acids, and therefore the quality of their protein, their ability to supply protein for protein synthesis, is limited to the level provided by that lower amino acid. The other amino acids can't be used for protein synthesis without increasing that limiting factor amino acid. So this is problematic, and it's very disingenuous of companies to say that plant proteins are therefore inferior, because in reality they're not. An amino acid is an amino acid. Once you have eaten a food and it's in your stomach and the amino acids are starting to be digested from the original protein, your body does not understand whether that amino acid has come from a cow, or has come from a bean, or has come from milk. It really is irrelevant to the body. A tryptophan amino acid is a tryptophan amino acid, and it can come from any source. Once it's in the blood, the body will utilize it wherever it's come from. But plants are limited in amino acids, so they're incomplete proteins, so they're not as good as animal proteins, surely. Well, that's not true, because we don't eat plants in isolation. There are examples around the world of certain people who do have a very limited diet, generally people in the developing world who have not a real access to proper food. They're very poor. They may have an inability to combine various plant proteins, but the vast majority of the world has access to multiple foods, and generally humans don't eat single foods in one sitting. We tend to combine foods. A good example of this is beans on toast. If you take the grain, the bread, and you analyse its protein content, you see it's deficient in lysine, like all grains are. However, the beans that you're putting on the toast are not deficient in lysine, and they contain enough lysine to be able to give the grains the make up the deficiency of the lysine in the grains. If we look at the legumes are deficient in methionine, but the grains contain enough methionine for the protein quality of the beans to be increased by supplying more methionine. So beans on toast is a complete protein. The extra methionine in the grain complements the legume, and the extra lysine in the legume complements the grain, creating a complete protein. So the fact that we don't eat plant proteins on their own, we combine plant proteins at meals, means that we are really, in essence, when we're eating plant proteins, eating complete proteins. Yes, eating a piece of bread on its own is not a complete protein, but beans on toast is a complete protein. Another factor to bear in mind is that most people mix animal proteins and vegetable proteins together. Unless you're a very strict vegetarian, you will tend to mix animal products with your plant products, and this will create complete proteins in the plant foods. Having a glass of milk with any plant food will create a complete protein, because the milk is a complete protein. It contains enough amino acids to be able to make up the shortfall of the amino acids that are missing in the plants. Now, I think this is important to understand, because plants can be an important source of protein. Legumes are, for example, high in protein, and there is evidence that those people that derive more of their protein from plant foods compared with those people that derive most of their protein from animal foods, those people that derive most of their food from plant foods are more healthy. They tend to have better indices for longevity and health, and the reason for this is nothing to do with the protein in the foods. It's to do with the fact that when you eat plant foods, you eat all of the other you take in all of the other nutrients within the foods, the plant foods, that are beneficial to your health, all the phytonutrients, all the fibre. So deriving a large portion of your protein from, for example, from legumes will provide you with all the health benefits of legumes. Now, this isn't to say that meat isn't important. Meat is a very important food. I advocate eating meat, particularly if it's grass-fed and organic. It's a good source of nutrients. In particular, it's a good source of very bioavailable iron. I also advocate consuming whey protein. Whey protein is a healthy food. It stimulates the immune system. It has very high quality proteins, and it's very convenient. I take whey protein myself for its convenience, and I wouldn't ever say not to consume these foods. But I think it's important to emphasize that plant proteins are really complete proteins when you consider them as part of the whole diet. In isolation, in the research unit, you could consider them. You could consider they have limiting amino acids, but when you look at the human diet as a whole, it's very, very rare that these foods are eaten in isolation. It's very, very rare that plant foods are not eaten without some kind of animal food there as well, and therefore a lot of the information about plant foods being incomplete proteins is actually disingenuous. And I think personally that if you derive more of your protein content from, for example, legumes, you will benefit your health. You will save a lot of money as well, because plant proteins tend to be much cheaper than animal proteins. And generally, most people eat too much meat anyway. Meat has a place in the diet, but most people consume too much, and cutting back a little on the meat and eating a few more vegetable products wouldn't harm most people. Plant foods are very high quality foods, and they tend to have lower levels of pesticide residues and drugs in them, for example. So I think the take-home message from this is that have a look at plant proteins as a source of your protein. Most people actually, when they're calculating their protein intake, don't even consider the protein in plants. They just add up the protein that's in their meat, add on the supplemental whey protein they take, for example, and they class that as their protein content. But most people have a higher protein intake than they think because of the plant proteins that they probably don't even count as bioavailable at all. So plant proteins have a place in your diet. They're very important. They're a good source of protein. And if you eat plant proteins, you'll also derive all of the other health benefits you get from plants, particularly legumes, which are a very high quality food, and I would recommend to anybody that they try to increase the amount of legumes that are in their diet. Not only will you get the protein, you'll also get all the beneficial glycemic effects, all the soluble fibre, all of the other nutrients that have been found in beans to be beneficial to the health. And if you want to eat meat, that's fine. If you want to supplement with whey protein, that's fine, but don't forget the plants, because they're a very good source of protein.